Hello everyone, welcome to StudyIQ. In this video, I will be discussing the fall of USSR, one of the most important topics of world history. My name is Dr. Mahipal Singh Rathore and I am a faculty for General Studies at StudyIQ. We have now launched our pendrive courses for CLAT and KVs as well. They are already available for SSC, CHSL, CGL and IBPS examinations. You can call on this number or visit the website directly to get the pendrive and tablet courses. So let me begin with telling you what exactly was the USSR, which is often known as the Soviet Union. So the full form was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So it was a union of many small countries that together formed a union, and they all were governed by Soviets, which means a lawmaking body or a council. Very simply, it means just a council. And since they were socialist in nature and they were republics, so it was a union of many countries. It was established after the Russian Revolution of 1917, but for the next 4 years, it was in civil war. There was a civil war going on between the different factions of the party. So the formal establishment was done in 1922. So now before we discuss the end of USSR, you must first know on a map how exactly did USSR look. So this red colored boundary that you see, it is the boundary of the USSR, and all these different colored countries are now independent countries, but earlier they were all part of USSR. So there were total of 15 sub-national Soviets. It means 15 different countries. They all had a centralized economy and the planning was done centrally. So this was one of the most basic characteristic features of the USSR, that the planning was central, and also there was one party, that was the Communist Party of the USSR, that only ruled. So there were elections, but then to be elected you must be a leader of the Communist Party only. It means that people cannot elect independently. There were no democratic elections like what happens in India or the USA, where people elect their own representatives to the Senate or the Lok Sabha. No, they were directly elected by Soviets. For example, there were small Soviets in a factory where all the workers of the factory chose a leader, and it was usually a member of the local unit of the Communist Party only. So you can understand how this was a very limited democracy and not a full functioning democracy. Now we will move on to the causes of the disintegration of USSR. The first reason is the space race. Billions of rubles were spent to compete with USA to reach this outer space. So USSR has, to its credit, the first satellite, that was Sputnik in space, then the first animal, cosmonaut, and woman in space. Now you have to find out the names of all these three and write in comments. This is also basic trivia. Most of you must know this if you are preparing for any kind of competitive exams. So the first animal in space, the first cosmonaut, and the first woman in space. Now we come to the arms race. USSR had a huge nuclear arsenal. It was the largest in the world, bigger than America's. Billions were spent on maintaining their huge army. The army of USSR was called the Red Army. Even today, Russia has a huge army. It is one of the largest armies in the world. There was the risk of mutually assured destruction. It means that if USA launches nuclear missiles on USSR will at the same time launch nuclear missiles on America. So it was mutually assured that even if one single missile is fired, it will lead to a chain of missiles being fired everywhere. So if if USA fires on the nuclear facilities in Russia or in USSR, they will fire from the ships, or if vice versa, if they fire on the US ships, then USA will fire its ground missiles onto USSR. So they had capabilities from all the three, Navy, Air Force and Army, to launch these nuclear missiles, and this was a huge risk back in the Cold War days. Coming to the Cold War, so this was a war which was not actually fought on the ground with soldiers facing each other, but it was fought in many other aspects. It was fought through proxy countries like Vietnam and in North Korea, South Korea, and so on. So USSR supported the countries like Cuba, North Korea, Vietnam, Laos, China, and many other communist nations, as well as the communist parties of most of the countries. So all this cost a lot of money. They spend material, they send technology to these countries, and so this was draining the USSR economy. Then there was the Afghan War. From 1979 to 89, USSR was involved in a deadly war with the Afghan Mujahideens. In this, 15,000 Soviet soldiers were killed and more than 50,000 were wounded, and finally they could achieve nothing in USSR. This was a huge drain, and also it led to a loss of prestige of the Red Army. So all these factors ultimately contributed to the decline in economy, and the major reason for the downfall in economy was the tight state control over all the resources and industries. There was no free market economy like USA, and this was draining the USSR's economic strength, because whenever government controls industries, the output is not as much as a free market. It is not as efficient as a free market economy would have. You can look at this graph, and it shows the national income of USSR from 1928 up till 1987. You can see there's a continuous decline throughout the years. Okay, so this was a huge reason that the USSR fell. Also, the nation had become a totalitarian state under Stalin. Stalin is considered a dictator by all the historians. He was as bad as Hitler in some aspects, because he also killed many people living in USSR. He also committed many atrocities on the people under USSR, as well as on the nations that were defeated, on the armies of the defeated countries in World War II. So under Stalin, the state became a totalitarian state, and it was not democratic in many aspects as it was supposed to be. Also, at the time of establishment in 1920s, the founding fathers of USSR like Lenin, they had hoped that the non-Russian people, the non-Russian ethnic people, for example the Turks of Turkmenistan, they would assimilate with the Russians and would form one great country. But it did not happen. Many people spoke different languages. All these 15 countries had languages of their own. Many had different cultures, different religions, and different types of behaviors from the ethnic Russian people. Now I will talk about the various events that went on. So firstly, I have to tell you about Mikhail Gorbachev. This is Gorbachev with his famous birthmark on his forehead. So he was appointed as the General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1985. This is the senior most position. It means a de facto leader. It is just like the Prime Minister. It is a position just like the Prime Minister in India. So he was appointed at the age of only 55. So he was comparatively young. And to make socialism more efficient and bring the economy out of stagnation, he launched two policies, Glasnost and Perestroika. Please remember, many people think that Gorbachev started these policies to disintegrate the USSR. It was not so. These policies were brought to improve the socialistic nature and make the economy more efficient. But due to these policies, USSR disintegrated ultimately. So what is Glasnost? Glasnost means openness, just like glass. It is a see-through, you can understand like that. So it basically meant freedom of speech. Earlier there was hardly any freedom of speech in USSR, but Mikhail Gorbachev gave this freedom to the media, to the intellectuals of USSR, and they could write whatever they wanted to say. And slowly this censorship led to people speaking against the state itself. They started speaking against Mikhail Gorbachev, against the policies of the USSR, the Central Soviet, as well as the overall structure of the Soviet Union. Also, records were declassified. The earlier records from World War II and previous years, they were declassified under the policy of Glasnost. Perestroika means restructuring or reformation. As you can understand from these words, it is a restructuring of the economic and political structures. So some political reformation policies were that elections were to be held, and in these elections more than one candidate could stand. Earlier in elections there was only one candidate, so it is not even an election, it is just an exercise. But now Gorbachev said that there will be elections, but still any member who wanted to stand for any position had to be a member of the Communist Party. So still no independent parties or other opposition parties. Then foreign investment was brought in USSR and privately owned businesses were allowed, although with many restrictions, but still earlier there was no private business, but now private businesses were allowed. So as these policies were brought in 1985 itself, these policies led to demand of sovereignty in the 15 subnational Soviets as well as the countries of Eastern Europe, which were under the de facto control of USSR. The countries like Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, these all had communist governments and they were part of the Warsaw Pact. So even though they were separate countries, they were not part of the USSR, but they had governments which were under the direct influence of USSR. So in the year 1989, it is also called as Year of Revolutions sometime. From the summer of 1989 till 1991, there were revolutions in all the East European and Central European countries, starting from Poland, then Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, Yugoslavia. Now, an important characteristic of these revolutions was that they were nationalistic in nature. Each revolution wanted independence from the control of Moscow and an independent government, the overthrow of communist rule. So after the revolutions in all these countries, the communist governments were overthrown and independent nationalistic governments came to power. This process took almost 2 years, and in all the countries except Romania, this process was bloodless. It means not many people died, but in Romania it was violent and the dictator of Romania was executed on live television by the people who were leading the revolution in 1989. Now these nationalist movements wanted to gain independence, as I have told you, and thus these communist puppet governments were removed. Now Gorbachev did not do anything to suppress these movements. Earlier in Poland, Hungary, the USSR had previously sent its army whenever there were such revolutions. It was not the first time that there was a revolution. It had happened before, famously in Hungary in 1956, when thousands of people were killed on the streets of Budapest when the revolution was crushed by this Red Army. But this time Gorbachev did not do anything, and this is the reason that these revolutions succeeded. Also remember, in 1989 there were the famous Tiananmen Square protests in China. So sometimes this year is also called as the Year of Revolution against Communists. So East Germany, after the revolution, the Berlin Wall was brought down by the residents of Berlin. This was in November of 1989. So East and West Germany unified after this, and also in the month of December of 1989, George Bush Sr., who was the president of USA at that time, and Mikhail Gorbachev met and they announced that the Cold War is now ended. It means that USSR and USA will be friends from now on. Now this led to a domino effect. This is a domino. It means if this will fall, it will lead to the fall of all of these pieces of metal that you see standing here. So this is a domino effect. It means that if one goes down, each of them will go down. So starting from 87, when Perestroika and Glasnost policies were implemented, so after 2 years of that, these independent Soviets had asked for sovereignty or independence in some cases. So Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania were the first ones to ask for sovereignty. They started asking in 1987 itself, especially Estonia, and slowly they declared their independence one by one by 1991 officially, but in some way or the other they were independent more or less from 1989. So please remember, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, these are the Baltic states. Why are they called the Baltic states? Because you can see in this map, they are near the Baltic Sea here, and this is the Gulf of Finland and this is the Gulf of Bothnia. Please remember these names, they might help you somewhere in geography questions. and these are the three countries: Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. Now the reason for these countries having a demand early on was that they had been historically different from Russia. If you remember, after World War I only these three countries were established, and right before World War II, Russia annexed them under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. So this was a pact signed between USSR and Germany under Hitler, and under this pact USSR had annexed all these three countries during World War II. You can you can check out my video on World War II and see in detail what this pact was about. Moving on. So as the domino effect progressed throughout 1990 and 1991, all the countries, all the Soviet subnationals, Soviets, they became independent. They declared independence one by one. So by 1991, more or less, USSR did not exist. Now coming on to the August coup of 1991. On 19th August, a group of senior party leaders who were conservatives, they attempted a coup d'etat by placing Gorbachev under house arrest. So they did this because they wanted to preserve USSR, as they believed that Gorbachev was leading to disintegration of USSR because he was doing nothing, as one after other all the countries were getting independence. He did not send the army, he did not try to stop them. So they got Gorbachev under house arrest in Crimea while he was on a holiday, and they said in Moscow that Mikhail Gorbachev is ill and the country is under emergency. But as this emergency was declared, people rose up against this coup. They came in large numbers to the Red Square near Kremlin in Moscow and also in St. Petersburg. And as the tanks came in, people stood against the tanks in front of those tanks. Although after few days, the Red Army refused to support the coup leaders. Initially, also only some factions of the army had supported this coup, and this led to the failure of this coup d'etat. During this coup d'etat, a very important leader, Boris Yelstin, so he was the leader of the Moscow unit of Communist Party since many years. He became a very big leader of the country because he had already been advocating for the independence of Russia from USSR. He was saying that yes, let these countries be separate, let Russia be an independent country. And during this coup, he became a leader of the coup, as he stood up on a tank very famously. You can see in this photograph, this is Boris Yeltsin. He is standing up on a tank and right in front of the parliament of USSR, and he is addressing the people and saying that we will not allow this coup and Russia will be independent. So he was elected as the first president of Russia in July 1991, right before this coup. President of Russia means, although Russia was part of USSR, but these republics had different leaders. So he was the leader of Russia, the country of Russia as we know it today. And he was telling Gorbachev again and again that dissolve USSR. So after this failed coup, what happens is Gorbachev is brought back to Moscow by Boris Yeltsin, but suddenly the power is under the control of Boris Yeltsin. Mikhail Gorbachev's position was very weak, and even the people believed in Boris Yeltsin, and so this breakup process accelerated. On 8th of December 1991, the presidents of Russia, Ukraine and Belarus signed the Belaveza Accords, and this dissolved the USSR in all but name. So these are the biggest countries of USSR, the biggest constituents of USSR. They said that we are leaving USSR and we are establishing the Commonwealth of Independent States. And few days after this, Gorbachev also said that now is the time to resign. So he resigns as the president of USSR on 25th December, and he also said that tomorrow, that is on 26th December, the Supreme Soviet will dissolve the Union. So the Supreme Soviet means the highest body which made decisions. So this was the highest legislative body, the Supreme Soviet. It dissolved on 26th December. And the Alma Ata Declaration was signed on 21 December. I will tell you later what this is. Basically, it was all the Soviets, they signed an agreement that yes, we are gaining independence, and we will form a Commonwealth of Independent States. So if you remember earlier, it was in Bela-Veza Accords, only 3 countries, Russia, Ukraine and Belarus, but now most of the countries came and joined in Alma-Ata Declaration. So if it is asked that what date did USSR did not ceased to exist, so people have different opinions. Some say it was on 8 December when these 3 countries decided to leave USSR. Some say it is on 25th December and some say on 26th. Don't worry about the exact dates. As you have seen, it was not a sudden event. You have seen here that it was a process which was long drawn, and so these dates are different. Now I will talk about the aftermath of the disintegration. So there was severe economic contraction and the living standards fell down hugely in all the countries of USSR, earlier USSR. There was increase in poverty, crime, corruption, unemployment, disease and income inequality. Also life expectancy decreased, adult literacy decreased, and the annual income also decreased. The reason was that suddenly these communist countries, the communist economy had to go into capitalist mode. So this was kind of a shock. It was a shock therapy to the economy, and it takes time to recover from such shocks. And this was the reason that the conditions in Russia in 1990s were horrible. It was a very poor country at that time. Another event was the establishment of Commonwealth of Independent States. So this is called CIS. This is the symbol or logo of the CIS. As I told you earlier, on 8 December, the Bela-Veza Accords were signed and the 3 countries decided to form CIS. Later on 21st December, other countries also joined under the Alma-Ata Protocol. So then 9 countries had joined. 11 countries had joined, but 2 of them have still not ratified the Alma-Ata Protocol. It means that they are associate members. So the CIS has 9 full-time members, 2 associate members, and 1 member, Georgia, has left the CIS in 2008. The Baltic states refused to participate. It means Latvia, Lithuania and Estonia, they refused to participate because they consider themselves independent. They say that we were not there. We were independent when USSR was formed. We are not part of USSR. USSR had annexed us during World War II. So they refused to be part of this Commonwealth, and Georgia has seceded in 2008. Rest all the 11 countries are part of it. I hope you understood the disintegration process of USSR. It is very complex and tough to remember some dates, but the takeaway from this lecture, if you remember 2 things, I would like to say that please remember what is Glasnost and Perestroika. That is the most important thing in this video. Thank you very much.